it's really quite critical because they need to understand whether they are depleting the trust fund, if this is a reasonable decision to make, and ensuring that it can help them decide that if they make a distribution now, they will still have sufficient funds for later needs, because it is important that they understand what the needs are for the beneficiaries, that they understand individuals' financial circumstances so that they are planning ahead.
So what cash flow modelling does for a trust and trustees is help them understand the longevity of liquidity that they've got in place in the trust and how that impacts distributions. It can also help them understand and see the tax treatment of maybe potentially selling different assets that the trust has and how that impacts distributions in the future. So we view all planning, whether it's with trustees or with personal wealth, it's not one decision in isolation, it's a series of decisions that need to be made and they all impact each other. The whole point of the cash flow is hopefully allowing the trustees to make a well-informed choice so that they make the right decision now, but also it doesn't impact things they need to do in the future.
Today we're discussing the considerations for trustees in making distributions with competing demands across 3 generations. We'll get into the detail in a moment, but first I'll come to my 2 guests for a brief introduction on their practice, starting with you, Dhana.
Hi David, thank you. My name's Dhana Sabanathan and I head the private client team at Michelmores, a law firm. We provide legal, tax and estate planning advice to trustees, beneficiaries, business owners and family offices.
Fantastic, great to have you with us. And Adam.
David, good morning. So my name is Adam Canavan. I'm one of the financial planners at Bowmore Financial Planning. We work with high net worth clients and their families to help them grow, preserve and structure their wealth. Working with people like Dhana to make sure that we're minimising tax and passing assets to the right people at the right time.
Fantastic. So today we're going to discuss the Hartley Family Trust, which is a £15 million structure with assets in a property portfolio and investments. The trustees are looking for advice on how distributions can be made to the family. Dhana, just starting with you, in your experience advising trustees, what are the fundamental challenges when multiple generations have competing needs?
Yes, so many challenges really for trustees. I think you mentioned some interesting assets like a property portfolio, some other types of investments. So immediately we're thinking liquidity. So even if you want to make a distribution, can you? What sort of tax would you have to trigger in order to create that liquidity? So that's a really important consideration, which is where we often need that sort of financial planning advice and modelling to actually look at what the consequences are of doing that. But also it's having to get enough information about the beneficiaries to figure out how do we balance these competing needs and be reasonable.
What's the legal framework within which trustees are making decisions around things like this? Quite complex decisions to make with larger families.
Absolutely. I think they always have to go back to the trustees, make sure who they're considering are actually named as beneficiaries, look at their powers and look at the letter of wishes. And really our advice is to kind of make sure that that's a living and breathing document whilst the settlor is still alive, but also that the settlor is also identifying who else in the family in the next generation they would want the trustees to really take guidance from as well, because a letter of wishes can get outdated very quickly, health can deteriorate, lots of other factors can affect a family. So it's keeping in touch and keeping that information up to date.
And how do they balance like the immediate needs if you've got, in this case, grandchildren going to school fees to be paid, older generations also wanting distributions from the trust? It's balancing the immediate with the longer term because this is a multi-generational structure it's designed to be.
Absolutely. I think that's the key thing. There's a real expense and an ongoing expense setting up a trust. It's not a short-term solution, and the intentions behind it, particularly in this case, has been emphasised on multi-generational. So we can't just deplete the trust fund in the short term. It's really trying to balance that. And really for trustees, it's saying there is no right decision. It's making sure that it can justify that decision. And we say not just to the beneficiaries now, but if you were a future beneficiary and you're looking at this decision making, you might not agree with it, but you can see that they considered the relevant information and reached a conclusion in that way.
So it's documenting it all properly to make sure that that paper trail is there.
100%, yeah.
Because how much does sort of fairness come into it? I mean, these are decisions that are hard to make. How does the trustee square that circle with the fairness of competing needs?
Yeah, I mean, fairness obviously does come into it, but if the letter of wishes may say that they do want certain people to be benefited more than others, so it's a different principle of fairness because you're applying that. So you can be unfair, and then although your general duty is to act in the benefit of all the beneficiaries. Often that's not possible where you've got competing interests. So it's coming to a decision that is reasonable. So obviously the principle of fairness is often used in most letter of wishes. People are saying, I would like you to be fair in your approach, but as long as you can justify that you considered everything and reached a decision that, for example, in a worst case scenario, a court would be able to say, well, that was reasonable. They don't have to agree with the decision, but you looked at all the relevant information, you complied, you were using the powers within the trust documents and reached that decision.
Thank you. And Adam, just on the financial planning side, so a bit more information on the assets within the trust. There's a £12 million UK residential property portfolio and 2 discretionary portfolios of £1.5 million each. When you're brought in to have a look under the bonnet, what's your first step?
So first step is, when it comes to looking at the trust, it's making sure that the trust assets are still in line with the objectives of the trust and obviously in line with the stated investment powers that the trustees have. Also as well, it's starting to piece together that broader plan of how each decision affects the other. So if there's distributions that need to be made in the relatively short term, it's how they affect long-term liquidity and distributions that maybe need to be made in the future, such as school fees you've already mentioned or anything of that nature.
And what about cash flow modelling? I mean, people might have considered that for their personal wealth, but actually within the trust setup, it's also relevant to think about. How do you see that being applied?
Absolutely, it applies to everything. So what cash flow modelling does for a trust and trustees is help them understand the longevity of liquidity that they've got in place in the trust and how that impacts distributions. It can also help them understand and see the tax treatment of maybe potentially selling different assets that the trust has and how that impacts distributions in the future. So we view all planning, whether it's with trustees or with personal wealth, it's not one decision in isolation, it's a series of decisions that need to be made and they all impact each other. The whole point of the cash flow is hopefully allowing the trustees to make a well-informed choice so that they make the right decision now, but also it doesn't impact things they need to do in the future.
And I suppose within that analysis, looking at the real estate side, we don't know how many units or assets that is held within, but that could be quite illiquid or it could have more liquidity inbuilt. But at least by looking at the analysis, you'd be able to see how long the liquid portion would be able to last.
Absolutely. So we're able to assess what's liquid in the portfolio, maybe what income's coming in from any of the properties. And then also we can help the trustees understand how they might want to position that portfolio going forward, whether it's better to sell individual units of the property or potentially sell as one portfolio.
And I mean, how might you talk to those involved in the trust about the difference between retaining the property and having more liquid investments? They might be less experienced dealing with investment markets, might be more cautious, think that could be more risky. How do you go about having that conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. So it all starts with sort of that education piece of actually sort of taking it back to basics and helping people understand the different options that are available, the pluses and minuses of each. And then actually, in reality, it all goes back to that cash flow model, because that allows us to do is demonstrate different scenarios and the potential impact of different choices. So we can go, if we do X, the impact long-term is that. If we do Y, the impact is that. And that obviously goes back to that property portfolio, which may be a liquid or perhaps more liquid assets in the trust going forward.
And Don, I mean, how can this kind of analysis support the trustees in decision-making?
It's really quite critical because they need to understand whether they are depleting the trust fund, if this is a reasonable decision to make, ensuring that it can help them decide that if they make a distribution now, they will still have sufficient funds for later needs, because it is important that they understand what the needs are for the beneficiaries, that they understand individuals' financial circumstances so that they are planning ahead. So it shouldn't be a shock that the grandchildren are coming up to school age. That could be built in and used in collaboration with that to model out those scenarios, which is going to be incredibly useful evidence of, unfortunately, no one has a crystal ball. We don't know what's going to happen to property values, investment values, but it can show that there was real thought put into that. And even, modelling, I think, and sharing that information that, if things go badly, this is where we might end up, and these are difficult decisions that have to be made. This is a good outcome, and this is, roughly where the financial planners think we might end up.
Because if the trust fund was depleted and they need to, for example, force sell a property at the wrong time, I mean, how do trustees kind of protect themselves by acknowledging this kind of analysis?
I think it's the open dialogue and making sure that the beneficiaries are aware of that, because obviously, and I think you sort of touched on it, that you have beneficiaries that maybe don't have a lot of awareness about investments or real understanding of kind of investment principles and having to manage cash, etc., on their own. So being able to share this and also show that they're monitoring the situation, they're monitoring investments is really key to help bring the beneficiaries on that understanding and kind of really help them understand the difficult decision making that the trustees have to make and be aware of that dilemma. So it's not just I would like some money, please, and I have no understanding as to why that might take a bit of time, or the answer may be no. If people really understand how a trust works and why it's there to protect them, the fact that it's not just a bank account actually means that it could be very useful in the event they do have problems, be that divorce or insolvency issues, that having that structure and those rules around it can be really valuable.
So that education and dialogue critical, isn't it? Just looking, Adam, at the tax efficiency on distribution. So trustees distribute to beneficiaries. What are some of the tax considerations they're thinking about?
So the main one is how you distribute. So is it the trust sells the assets itself and then distributes to beneficiaries and the tax rates that trusts pay? Or is it potentially assigning assets to beneficiaries and then letting them encash things themselves? So the crucial one is obviously trusts pay the highest rate of tax, regardless, and often beneficiaries can have a lower rate of tax potentially and more flexibility from that piece. So again, it goes back to that original plan of going, we've got a couple of options in terms of how we distribute. Let's test those options and see which is going to give us the best outcome for the beneficiaries. And
many trusts use insurance bonds underneath to hold the trust assets. Could you walk us through why they do that and why it's beneficial?
Yeah, so an insurance bond is a fantastic asset for a trust for a number of features. So it benefits from gross roll-ups, so it grows very nicely in the bond. So from a tax efficient perspective, it benefits from a tax deferred annual allowance of 5% of the original capital. Why that's really useful is if it's unused, it's not a use it or lose it, it rolls over to future years, which can create greater flexibility for distributions. The other one that's a really nice feature of bonds is you can break it up into a series of parts called segments, and you can assign segments from the trust to beneficiaries, so then they can encash at their tax rates. Other things that work really nicely when you assign portions of a bond to a beneficiary is you can use things like top slicing relief to hopefully bring the tax bill down even further.
And if a trustee is going to make a substantial distribution, what kind of tax planning might they think about with the beneficiaries?
So I think first port of call is you want to understand the tax position of any sort of distribution to start with. So you need to have that calculation done. And that's probably where we'd work with sort of a third party tax planner to do that, understanding that position. And then it's going, is there anything we can do, any other way that can make this slightly more efficient? So it starts with getting in the right third party tax advice, analysing the situation, and then going, are there any other avenues that we can use going forward?
And Dhana, I mean, from a legal advisory perspective, how much visibility trustees have on beneficiaries' personal financial circumstances, tax residency, all of these factors? How much do they need to know to not be exposed themselves?
Unfortunately, they do need to know, and it's not always easy. And obviously, everything is very global, so people will move around, but you have to kind of be on top of that. I think if you weren't and you accidentally triggered a really adverse tax consequence for a beneficiary simply by not understanding their situation and running past that and looking at the various options, you would be considered as not fulfilling your fiduciary duty. So it is quite onerous for the trustees, and obviously some trustees will have difficulties even getting in touch with the beneficiaries and maintaining that contact. So it's important to show that those efforts have been made. But yes, the trustees aren't supposed to be tax experts, but they are expected to get the relevant advice and consider that. And, that could be sharing it with the beneficiaries, and they can't just say, oh, the beneficiaries got their own advice, they said it's okay, we'll just go ahead and distribute without understanding the consequences. So there really is a lot expected of the trustee before that kind of decision is made.
Where we have multiple beneficiaries with competing demands but that haven't been sort of resolved through education and conversation, what's the process there? How do you reach a decision where these parties aren't fully satisfied with how the trustees are looking at the prioritisation of different needs?
I think, unfortunately, you're not necessarily going to be able to keep everyone happy. Really, it comes down to, have you considered all of the relevant information? And do you feel that you can justify, the trustees feel that they can justify the decision based on the evidence that they've got? And again, always looking back to the trustee, the letter of wishes, who set up the trust, are they still alive? Can we have a conversation about their views? Sometimes the role of the trustees is to take that blame that a living member of the family doesn't want to necessarily take, blame for, which is absolutely fine because not all of that information will necessarily be disclosed to the beneficiary. So it's creating that level of comfort for the trustees before they take a decision. But as in a lot of situations in life, you might end up not being able to please everybody.
And Adam, if you were going to speak to the trustees next week to look into this a bit further, what are some of the things you'd be tabling with them? What would you want to know a bit further on, and how would you start to think about it?
Yeah, so it goes to what Donna was just saying. I think you need to understand the dynamics first of the interaction between the trustees and the beneficiaries to see how that conversation is playing out and how much communication there is going on. And then I think it's all about being proactive and looking slightly further down the road. So we want to understand not just what are the immediate needs, immediate distribution requirements. It's what are the requirements going forward? What are the trust objectives long term? That's going to allow us to hopefully set out a framework and a path that meets all of them, rather than just, we've done this today, that's great, no thought about sort of implications for the future.
Well, thank you for talking to me today, and we look forward to sharing this scenario. Thank you.
Thank you.